This is Cindy Ingram, and welcome to the Art Class Curator podcast, where we're taking art out of the dark with thoughtful explorations and in-depth interviews designed to ignite curiosity and delight in art classrooms everywhere. Hey everybody, before we get started with our fabulous interview with Holly Bess Kincaid, I wanted to tell you a little bit about a new program I have coming up on August 2nd, and it is called #Year of Art. This is a 4-part video workshop on how to easily plan for an entire year of an engaging art appreciation lessons. You'll learn how to add more art history and art appreciation into your classroom without extra work. And I also have for you a brand new free 1-page planning tool that will guarantee some awesome lessons this year. As a part of the series, you'll also get to download my free brand new 1-page planning tool, which will help you create an amazing art appreciation experience for your students, and will develop a blueprint for a full year of high-quality, high-engagement art critique activities. You can sign up for this free video workshop at artclasscurator.com/artyear. I look forward to seeing you in your inbox on August 2nd. Now let's get to that interview with Holly Bess. On today's episode, Holly Bess Kincaid is back to talk about finding funding for your classroom. She has mad skills in this area and over the last 5 years has received about $75,000 in grant money for school. I know, right? From finding a grant to creating a killer application to following through for the funders, you'll get some tactical tips from Holly Bess on how to get more resources for your art program that will help you create meaningful art experiences for your students. So I'm happy to welcome back Holly Bess Kincaid. She is our first second-time visitor to the Art Class Curator podcast. Welcome, Holly Bess.
Hello. Thanks for having me again.
You're welcome. So last time we talked about your amazing experiences at your school where you have a very large refugee population. So if you're listening to this podcast right now and you have not listened to that episode, I really recommend you go back and listen to that one as well, because there's a lot of amazing nuggets on how to really connect with students' personal history, and it was amazing. So definitely go back and listen. For those that missed the first episode with you, can you tell us a little bit more about you and your background?
Yes. Well, I have been teaching for 24 years. I have taught in Virginia, in rural Virginia, in Pulaski County. I've taught in Texas, in Houston, and then now I'm back in Virginia in the Blue Ridge region in Harrisonburg, Virginia. So I've taught in a diverse group and different areas where it's very rural to very urban in Houston, right outside near NASA. And then now I have sort of a city group of students, but we are a refugee, relocation, and high immigrant population of students. So I have a lot of English language learners in our district. We have, I believe, 63 different languages spoken at home by our students.
Today we're going to talk about grants and finding funding for your classroom, because Holly Bess is a little bit of a superhero when it comes to getting grants and funding for her classroom. So can you share some of the grants and funding that you've received?
Yes. Well, I think out of necessity, we find ways to get funding for our classrooms. I've been in several situations where there are things that we want to do, and we need to find the funding to be able to make those things happen. With my diverse population, I think it's really important, to give them wonderful materials to use. And so my students are a lot of, as you said, refugee and immigrants, and we have a high poverty sect of students that are with us here in Harrisonburg, Virginia, in the Blue Ridge Mountains. But some of the grants, oh goodness, in the last 5 years, I would dare say I have racked up quite a few $1,000s in different grants from different places. One of my favorite grants that I think a lot of people are not aware of is from Lowe's. They have a Transforming Classroom grant that is available to teachers, not just art teachers, but any educator, and it can be used. I was able to get a $5,000 grant that helped me to be able to build a art gallery in a sort of unused space outside of my classroom in the hallway to put up and to be able to purchase art frames, a hanging system for the gallery, to be able to get a little setup for students to be able to do some work and reflective writing in the hallway. So it really kind of changed an empty space. That was a grant that is available, I think, twice a year, so in the fall and in the spring. That is wonderful for teachers to be able to add to their classroom. And if you have a local Lowe's store, you can definitely talk to them about how you might be able to apply for that.
So I've been in a situation where I walked into my very first elementary teaching job, and I found dried out markers. I found probably 15 boxes of chopped up construction paper, and I found some rusty scissors. And that was it. And it was a portable, and I was freaking out because I didn't even have paper. I had nothing.
Mm-hmm.
So I was totally scrambling. So I really needed, I think, some guidance here. I ended up finding my family and friends donated to my classroom. My school gave me a very small amount of money to buy paper and things. But yeah, I think this topic is really important for a lot of teachers out there. So let's talk about sort of going through the whole process of getting a grant. So where do you even find out about what's available? Do you have any good resources for that?
Well, I think one, just searching on the web. On Twitter, I've found so many different opportunities where companies and different organizations are giving funding to teachers. I try to keep an eye out. If you're not on Twitter, you need to hop on there. There are so many great art educators who are sharing different grant opportunities and funding opportunities all the time. That's been a wonderful resource for me. I was able to get 3 3D printers for my classroom that way. I've had a couple other fundings of $1,000 for art materials for my classroom from a gas company. So different gas stations. So it's really amazing when you start looking out there. There are people who want to support educators, and I think if you are actively looking and searching on the web, you'll be surprised, really, I think, how many of them are overlooked. I have done grants or both within my community. We actually, in our district, we have a couple different grants that are available through an educational foundation locally. Mm-hmm. And I had something similar when I was in Houston as well, that teachers would apply for a grant locally and be able to get some money for their classroom. Here in our community, we also have an arts organization that is a nonprofit that also gives some money for teachers for their classroom for art projects. Those are opportunities that I think sometimes people aren't aware of. So I think when you go out into your community and know the organizations that are there, you'll find a lot of opportunities that people want to support your school and your classroom. And especially if you have unique ideas that are creating project-based learning opportunities for our students, which we need to bring back across the curriculum. Students love to be engaged in making and learning. So those opportunities, I think, are very actively funded. But if you are struggling with grants too, even when I, very much like you, I went into a brand new school and the budget for new supplies was apparently purchased and then sent back to the company.
Oh my gosh.
And the money was spent elsewhere. And so all of the materials that I was supposed to have for the first 5 years were gone. So what do you do when you have nothing? We did penny drives. I started looking for those grants and doing searches. I found quite a few, and I'd be happy to share some of those. If they wanted to contact me on Twitter or email me, I'll send them a link of some of the ones that I've gotten over the years that I know are still actively out there that are available for teachers. There's money available. We just have to really be gung-ho and start asking and not to be shy about it.
Yeah, I think that's what it is don't just say, oh, I'm in this situation, that sucks, and then that's it. But be proactive, find it, look, ask around.
Yeah, they're out there, and I think we have to recognize the problem and then start finding the solutions that are doable. Donors Choose is also a great opportunity for teachers to ask. I've been blessed to have a one or two of those funded, and not by, I know some people are like, oh no, it's going to be my friends helping me support that. But it was actually all of the donations were done by people I had no idea, that I've never met them before. So different places. So Donors Choose is a great opportunity for teachers if they're doing smaller projects as well.
Yeah, I've gotten maybe, I think 6 to 8 Donors Choose products funded. And it's always just total strangers. One of them was for Sharpies, and the lady was just like, I have granddaughters that love art, and I just wanted to support art in the schools. It was just some random person from some random state. It was really amazing, that platform. So we find a grant. So say we're going to apply for the Lowe's grant. What is usually the next steps once you've found it?
I think really one of the things that I notice people might miss is really looking at what they're asking for. What are they going to fund you for? What do you want? And really kind of writing that out and making it super simple for yourself. I sometimes will even do a mind map. This is my goal. This is what I want. I want a classroom set of iPads. Then what am I going to do with those? How am I going to use them in my classroom? And start making a list of all the ways that you are actually going to use them. And be very clear, because a lot of the people who are judging these grants may not know all that edu-speak.
Yeah.
They might not understand those educational jargon things. So we have to be very clear, and we need to clearly say how we are going to use it, how it's going to impact our students, how it's going to change our classroom environment for the better, to really share that impact. Some of the grants also ask for follow-up. So how are you going to be either sharing what you do with the product or with the funds out? Are you going to make a video? Are you going to share it with the community and, put a poster up that says special thanks to the Arts Council of the Valley, or special thanks to Lowe's for funding this? So how are you going to really let other people know? So each grant within their application, it says what they want to hear. And we just have to be very active in reading and understanding what they're wanting. And then I think also it's when you write your grant, I like to reread it out loud to myself and really make sure that I am hearing all of those points. Have a guest reader read through your application and say, these are the things I want to make sure I hit on. Am I talking about how students are being impacted? Am I talking about those ways that I'm sharing with the community and with others? Am I talking about the materials and how they are going to make a difference? So by hitting on those topics, I think you're reaching what they want to know, that their funding is going to someone who is going to make a difference.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really excellent outline, I think, for people to consider. And we'll put a summary of what you're saying in the show notes. So if you're listening to this in your car or something, we will have some notes available for you on the website for, some of these important considerations. So, and I imagine that things like telling the demographics of your students would probably be an important thing to incorporate in your application, or do they usually ask for that in a separate?
It depends on the grant. Some of the grants definitely do ask for that information. Some of that information I have to get from our administration, whether it's demographics or breakdowns of our student population, the income group. We are a high poverty area, so that is something that I definitely would include within my application if it's asked for. But sometimes when it's a written element, a narrative that I'm writing, I'll include that these are students who definitely need these opportunities, and how am I sharing some of these opportunities with students to have better materials and artistic materials so that they can feel like true artists? How am I elevating their experience? So all of those things I think are really important, but each grant application is slightly different. And I think it's allowing yourself plenty of time as well. I think being a constant grant searcher, I'm always keeping my eyes open to when grant opportunities come available. Even if I've missed one, say I find a grant, I'm like, oh, wow, that was like due in January. I will put a note on my calendar so that I can keep an eye out for that grant next year and maybe apply to it. so that I'm sort of in the back of my mind or even on my calendar having it remind me, hey, last year there was a great grant you missed. Maybe you want to look at it. So those are things to kind of keep in mind, even when you miss one. It sometimes will be an annual grant opportunity, and don't forget about it. Keep it
that's a great tip. Yeah, and you can set up like Google Calendars and things like that to send you emails and send you reminders so that you can get that right in your face. I do that all the time. Excellent. So you also mentioned when you were talking about your application, you mentioned the word narrative. Do you think that creating some sort of story or hook in your application might make it stand out?
I think I try to be quite clever with some of the writing that I do with my applications, and I sometimes will have funny or cute little names that I will put with the titles. I had a grant that I got this past spring. My students were doing crankies. A cranky is a very old art form that is basically having the students tell a story on a scroll. And they are cranking the little turn and making the story roll through. It's like an old movie picture, but it's on a scroll. So it's like 20 to 30 feet long, and the students work together. So I got a grant for $1,000 to be able to get the materials to build a whole set of crankies that we can then use year after year. Being a student of English language learners, my students are now having to tell stories, both visually and saying them out loud. So it was a great opportunity, but I wanted to come up with a cute way to call it. So we called it the Cranky Connection. So it's a little nod to Kermit the Frog there with the rain. But I think talking about and coming up with cute names or narratives, also talking about how this is going to encourage my students to be able to speak and talk about their artwork. I'm talking about those things that my students definitely need to do on a daily basis, that's a district requirement that my students are reading and writing and speaking every day. So when you are finding a grant and asking for funding that's going to support the needs of our students, not just within your own subject, but cross-curricular, I think that definitely helps add a bit of bang for the buck when someone is helping to fund your project.
Oh, yeah, that's a really good point. It's adding in the connections to the other subject areas because they might be looking for something like that when they're choosing the winners. So we have some good tips here that you're saying for creating a standout application, using clever language. I love the tip of having them read out loud the application because I used to do that all the time. I probably should be doing that more often now. But you catch typos that way. You hear when it sounds weird, and spoken language always sounds different than written language, so you can make it flow easier. So I love all of those tips. Can you think of any more tips for creating a standout application?
I think it's really important to do a budget. I try to lay out a very honest budget about what the cost will be for any of the materials and have that laid out. Sometimes the grants will ask for that. Even if they don't, if there is a narrative option, I try to include that so that they know what I'm spending the money on and that I'm being very honest with how I'm going to use the funds. And also, is it something that is going to be a consumable material, or is this something that is going to have some lasting impact? So, for example, with the Cranky Connection, that is something that will be able to be used not only by the art room, but by perhaps the drama instructor because we shared this grant, or is it something that could even be used by the librarian to tell some stories later? So by showing something that may have some consumable items that are mixed in, but also something that will allow the funding to be used year after year, I think also has some lasting impact. The people know they're investing in the learning opportunities in a classroom, and people like to hear that. So when you can put the budget and be very clear with how you're spending the funding, whether it's by giving links to a shopping list, it also helps with your bookkeeper. When I create a shopping list, even an Amazon cart or such, I can show what those materials are. And when it comes time to purchasing them, I have my very clear budget. I can pull that out of my files and I can say, okay, I'm ready to order. If I receive the grant, I'm ready. Here's what I need to buy.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I think it's really important to definitely have a very clear way that you're going to spend the funds.
Well, too, and I think that it shows the people who are choosing the winners of the grant, that they're investing in a teacher that has all their stuff together. That they can trust that you will not use their funds in any sort of irresponsible way, that you have a plan. Mm-hmm. And I think that alone, even especially if they didn't ask for it, I think that alone shows that you're trustworthy and you're responsible and that you're creative and that you're a good investment for their company.
Yeah.
That's
and
really
I think
smart.
I would also suggest, if it's possible, to follow up if you do receive a grant, to say thank you.
Yeah.
I think old-fashioned thank yous go a long way. If you receive a grant, if it's from a local organization or even if it's from a larger organization that might show an image of what was created or share in some way, whether it's a review or a video or a document or even just a certificate that you make up that has a little image and they can post it in their business or location that shows, hey, we helped support the Capital of Creativity at Skyline Middle School. Here's what we did. That's something that's a little pat on the back that they can hang up, and they're proud of that. So it's a win-win for both of you. So thank you goes a long way.
Yes. And I think that too, having thank yous from the students is probably something beneficial too. Do you have the students write thank you letters?
Sometimes it depends on the grant. Other opportunities where the students are showing off their artwork, I think sometimes if you can have a picture of a student smiling, that smile says a lot. So yeah, it really depends on the grant.
Yeah. And I know Donors Choose requires you to have thank you notes from students. And I think it's a great lesson for students that, to slow down and say thank you. It's something that is kind of, I don't know if it's leaving our etiquette these days or not, but with email and social media, it's sort of becoming muddled.
It's a lost art. My mother is 90 years old, and she and I have often talked about how we miss the idea of mail and cards and stamps, and a good old thank you note is really important. And and emails definitely do make it quite quick, but if you can definitely have something that they can hold, that they can post, it's wonderful.
Have you ever had any situations where you got one grant one year and you got it again the next year?
Yes.
Same one.
So we have a few grants that I've applied to, both locally and in different areas where I have applied to the grant again. I've been blessed the last 5 years that I have gotten several grants each year that have funded some special projects. I try to think about different learning opportunities for my students each year, and I think the summers are wonderful opportunities to brainstorm some of those ideas that you would like to do and dream up those things that we can apply for in the fall or in the spring. So yeah, there are a few that I do love. Some of them are local and some of them have been, I've received a couple. There was a Citgo had a couple grant opportunities that they had done. I'd gotten those twice, I believe. There's been different ones. And yes, if you find a good grant and you are, I think, very appreciative of their things and they see that you are using their materials and their funding in an appropriate way, it doesn't hurt to ask.
Yeah, definitely. You might think, well, I got it once, I shouldn't, I'm not going to get it again. But I think all of that etiquette that you're talking about and really doing meaningful projects and really being clear, they're going to appreciate that and want to continue that relationship. So I think that's...
Yeah. Well, and I found in talking to some of the people who are funding and who have grants, they're quite surprised at the hesitation that teachers have to take the time. And I think so many teachers, there's a fear that stops them from asking. The fear, I'm not going to write very well, or, I don't have time to put this all together, or, it's not going to be worth it. There's those little negative words that we say in our minds that we need to just tell that to stop, because if you don't ask, guaranteed, if you don't ask, you're not going to win. So I think we need to put ourselves out there. I'm asking for my students. If, I was fortunate to get a Target field trip grant last year and was able to take my students to Washington, D.C., to the National Gallery of Art. There are these opportunities. Ask. And if you don't get it the first time, you can, some of the grants they'll tell you maybe what the readers were missing in your application, but don't be afraid to apply again. If you don't get the grant the first time, try again next year. Maybe relook at your application, or even take your old application and rewrite it. See if you can improve on it and submit it again. So
yeah, I love that. I mean, we get so bogged down as teachers, and I think it's just one more thing to do, but I think it's so important. And imagine what sort of learning activities you can do and what resource with more resources. So I think it's worth it, definitely. And another thing I thought of while you were talking about creating your application over the summer is that you can even kind of double duty this in a way that you're planning your curriculum at the same time. So you're already going to be thinking through the projects that you're going to be doing. So you could be, at the same time as you're planning your projects, also be writing this out, for a grant application. So, maybe you won't be able to do it this next year because you don't have the resources, but you have a lesson that you've planned and that it's ready to go. And I think it's time well spent either way.
And it really is. You're thinking through it. It's going to be a win-win for everyone. And I think surprisingly, once you start applying for grants and you get into the habit of understanding what you're writing and you're very clear with what you're saying that you're going to do, it starts to come quite quickly. It doesn't take as long. I think when I first started, I was definitely taking a little bit longer, being more cautious. But as you get into the habit of applying and understanding really what they're looking for, the process might take a few hours. So an afternoon, some quiet time to yourself, a good cup of tea, and you can, get an application done. And of course, if I'm setting my mind in advance and saying, okay, in January, this application is due, I'm thinking about it throughout the upcoming months and kind of thinking in my mind as I'm even driving down the road, okay, what am I going to say? How am I going to apply? What do I want to do? All of those things that you're thinking about and brainstorming, once you actually sit down to start writing, it comes so much clearer if you've done that thinking ahead of time.
Yeah, and you can even start yourself a Google Doc, and then every time you come up, as you're kind of going about your life, if you think of something related to it, just throw it in there, throw the idea down. And then once you're ready to sit down and do it, you've got it all sort of in front of you, all your ideas, and it could come together a lot easier. I also do voice memos on my phone when I probably shouldn't do that when I'm driving, but I do. I will be driving a long distance and I'll come up with an idea and I'll just pop open my phone and have Siri open the voice app and I just record whatever it is I'm thinking, because usually the best writing comes when I'm just doing something random, walking the dog or in the car or in the shower, and capturing it is, I think, important because you might not remember it later. So
yeah, I do the same thing. My phone is definitely on record quite a bit, and I will hit that little button. I have notes actually on my phone of grants that I want to remember. So I have a grant note folder that I just add to. So when I hear about a new grant, I'll add it there so that I can look at it. If I get an idea for something that I want to do, I will add that there and then see if I can find a grant that fits the particular project. So yeah, when you start making those lists, you're doing some of the work just by brainstorming.
Yeah, that's awesome. So what we'll do is I will get from you some of your favorite grants, and then I will, if I find out any more grants, I will put them into the show notes of this post so listeners can go through and see some of the grants that we know about. And then as I come up with more of them, if I happen to come upon any more, I will add to it.
Well, and I think it would be a great opportunity to ask the listeners, what are some of your favorite grants that you have received? I think together, especially on Twitter, I find that, together the power of us united is sort of unstoppable. So if we're sharing these grants that we're receiving and getting those out there, we could make a wonderful list that would be a resource for everyone. That's a win for our students, and that's really what we're all here for.
Yes, that is an excellent point. So send me an email, comment on the show notes, and let us know of your favorite grants, and we will add them to the list. And that will be an excellent resource for everyone. And get on social media and talk about it too, because it's great, the connections that we can make, what we can do together. I love that. Yeah. Okay, so I think we covered process. Can you think of anything else?
I think just to review, I think it's really important to read what the grant is funding, what things they're looking for, be very clear and precise in your writing, clever ways that you're going to be sharing with students, what are the learning outcomes, and how will you follow up when the grant is finished and when the project is done. So I think just kind of going over all of those things and being very specific with your grant. Well, I think those are really the most important things when you're reviewing.
I think so too. And really making sure that connection with what they're wanting fits with what you're doing. And you can always find probably some sort of connection. So I think that's really good to highlight. So excellent.
Yeah. I think the arts are a very powerful learning tool. So many times I think art teachers don't look at some of the broader based grants, but we can really make some connections to just about every curriculum and need. Yes. And I think when you open your eyes to some of the ways that we can broaden learning and project-based learning environments for our students, the funding is there. Just ask.
Yes. Okay, so I always ask the question at the end of every episode, which artwork changed your life? And Holly Bess gave the best answer to that question in the first episode. So I want you to go back and listen to that, even if you just fast forward to her story, because it's really awesome. So this time let's ask, what is one of your favorite artists or one of the most influential artists for you?
So shout out, I've got a little Anne Hamilton. So that'll be the artist in the story that you got to go back and listen to, because that's the great one. Good. I think when you think about artists, I am thinking back to, I was blessed to get my master's degree through NYU in Venice, Italy. I had the opportunity to meet a lot of Italian artists and be able to visit with them and get to know a lot of the Italian art scene, including going to the Venice Biennale. So if I think about artists, I have a fascination with installation artwork. And I would love to tell you a little bit of a story about Maurizio Cattelan.
Okay.
So if you are not familiar with his artwork, you need to look up this character because he is unique. So I love the idea of artists and a little bit of humor in life. And as an art student, I was able to have the opportunity. We were told that we were going to meet this artist, Maurizio Cattelan. This is in, I believe, the late 90s. And he was still kind of a young and up-and-coming artist. He wasn't really on the full global scale yet. We sat together, I think there were 12 students around a big conference table, and we're talking to the artist. He was telling us about his artwork, and I was completely engaged in listening to these stories. He was talking about a piece where he went into a gallery. He was locked into a room and he was to create this piece of artwork. And after a certain amount of hours, he opened the window and he had tied together a whole bunch of strings and he escaped out the window. And so when they came back to find the artwork, he was gone, the window was open, and there were just things tied out the window. So there's a sense of humor there. There's a sense of artwork kind of going beyond the idea of the swirly frame, which is something that I think I echo within my own artwork and with my love of installation artwork and sculptures and things that are not constantly remaining. It can be temporary artwork that disappears with the environment or with nature. But I think one of the most humorous moments is at the end of this hour-long conversation, and we were learning all about his work. Come to find out, sitting in front of us was not Maurizio Cattelan. Oh no, he had sent an imposter. It was not him. Oh my gosh. We had all been asking him questions, and he had sent someone else in his place to act like him. So I love the idea of artists who are surprising me and catching me off guard, who are engaging my senses or at least making me laugh a little bit. So
that is hilarious. That's a work of art in its own.
It was. I mean, it was performance art at its best, sent by someone else.
I love that. And he got out of a speaking gig.
He did. And he probably got paid for it still. So, yeah.
I wonder if did your professor know?
I wonder. I should write her. She's actually one of my professors. Her birthday was yesterday, and she turned 96. So I'll have to write her and ask her if she actually knew that he was not going to be there. I have to wonder. I kind of think I think it was a surprise for all of us. So
that's fantastic. What a good story. You're a great storyteller.
Oh, I love a good story. I think it's important, especially when we're talking about artists and artwork. There's so many things that we can read into a painting and have great conversations with students about artwork. But if we can meet an artist and have those opportunities, I love that as well. So
that's awesome. Okay. So thank you again so much for coming back on the podcast. And one more question I forgot to ask is, how can teachers connect with you online?
Oh, well, I'd love to hear from folks. You can find me on Twitter at ArtLadyHBK. That's my initials, Holly Bess Kincaid, and I've been the Art Lady for a very long time. And you can also find me on Instagram with the same screen name, as well as on my blog at the Capital of Creativity, which is a Weebly.com website.
Awesome. And we will link to all of those in the show notes so that you can connect with Holly Bess after the episode if you want to read more on her website about what she's up to. So thank you. You have provided all of us such great insight into this process, and I want to hear from you, and I want to hear if you get a grant and tell us how it went, and we want to hear about it. So tag us both on Twitter or I won't see it on Twitter. I'm never on Twitter, but
tag me.
The illusion that I am on Twitter is there, but I am not actually engaged in Twitter. It stresses me out. But anyway, tag me on something else and I'll see it, or just send me an email.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you again.
Thank you.
What an inspiring experience Holly Bess creates for her students and community. Be sure to check out the show notes at artclasscurator.com/5 to learn more about Holly Bess's work and everything we talked about today. And spoiler alert, I've got Holly Bess coming back onto the podcast soon to talk all about how she received around $75,000 in grants for her art program. Make sure you are subscribed to the show so you won't miss that. Next week, we are talking to Dr. Katie Monin from Pop Culture Classroom. I have to tell you that I spent the next 2 days after her interview with my head buzzing with ideas about a new type of literacy needed in our students. Keep listening to hear a preview of my interview with Katie. Thank you so much to Holly Bess for her amazing insights on finding funding for your art program. We'll keep a running list of any grants we find on the show notes for this episode at artclasscurator.com/11. We'd love to hear about the opportunities you find as well as your successes. Tag us on social media or send an email to cindy@artclasscurator.com to get in touch. And don't forget, you can share your artwork that changed your life at artclasscurator.com/podcast and click on Submit Your Story. Next week on the podcast, we'll have a special solo show with just me talking all about how to incorporate more art appreciation activities in your classroom. I'll see you next week. Thank you so much for listening. If you like what you hear, please subscribe and give us an honest rating on iTunes. This will help other teachers find us and hear these amazing stories. Do you want even more art inspiration? Sign up for Art Class Curator's once-a-week email newsletter, Your Weekly Art Break. Teacher Sarah Warnock says, I truly do take a break from my busy week to check out all your links and feel inspired. Everything you share is relevant, meaningful, and also super helpful. You definitely help me become a better art teacher, and I look forward to your emails each week. You can sign up at artclasscurator.com/artbreak. And as a free gift for subscribing, you'll get 6 free art interpretation worksheets to use in your classroom. Be sure to tune in next week for more inspiring art interviews.